Olá, bom dia, sejam todos bem-vindos. Iniciamos agora a 7ª edição do Sigera, Simpósio Internacional sobre Gerenciamento de Resíduos Agropecuários e Agroindustriais. Como todos sabem, esse ano, em função das limitações impostas pela pandemia, o evento está sendo realizado de maneira 100% online e reforço que todos são muito bem-vindos e esperamos que tenham um bom ambiente de interação aqui dentro da plataforma para poder efetuar a troca de ideias e interação. O Sigera é um evento que congrega especialistas e entusiastas sobre os termos que envolvem resíduos da produção agropecuária e a produção agroindustrial, dividido em 3 áreas, sendo a área de resíduos da agricultura, resíduos da agroindústria e resíduos da produção animal. O Sigera ele é organizado pela Sociedade Brasileira dos Especialistas em Resíduos Agropecuários e Agroindustriais, e essa edição conta com a correalização da Embrapa, representada pela Embrapa Suínos e Aves, com o apoio da Embrapa Solos, Embrapa Pecuária Sudeste, e também temos o apoio institucional da Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina, da Universidade Federal da Fronteira Sul, da Universidade da Fronteira do Chile, do INEA do Chile, do Laboratório de Microbiologia da Universidade Federal da Fronteira Sul, LabMI, da Rede Biolac, da Shimatsu, e também contamos com o apoio institucional do BEP, representado aqui pelo Instituto 17, no qual hoje teremos a contribuição do Dr. Alessandro Sanches. Eu gostaria, então, de, por favor, que compartilhassem a minha tela. Obrigado. Primeiramente, gostaria de saber se todos estão me ouvindo bem. Podem ficar à vontade de colocar no chat, ao lado da nossa tela, dessa apresentação, um momento, então, para interação. Caso tenhamos alguma limitação, alguma coisa, fiquem à vontade para utilizar esse chat como ambiente de comunicação. O Sigera ele está estruturado, então, a programação durante 3 dias. Esses 3 dias, então, iniciando hoje, 3 de novembro, até sexta-feira, 5 de novembro. Nós teremos, dentro da programação, ele está estruturado, dividido dentro de cada dia em 3 blocos de atividades. Inicialmente, então, o primeiro bloco, nós temos a apresentação de painéis que são realizados a partir de convidados especialistas em cada temática abordada no painel. O primeiro painel, o painel de hoje, abordando especificamente mudanças climáticas. Estamos vivenciando agora, nesse momento, a COP26. Então, o painel de hoje visa estruturar um pouco uma visão da parte dos resíduos agropecuários, resíduos agroindustriais, como que a ciência está trabalhando, quais habilidades nós estamos trabalhando, temos em função para... No painel 2, nós teremos uma abordagem sobre economia circular e oportunidades para a bioeconomia. E na sexta-feira teremos um painel envolvendo uma visão mais ampla com relação ao manejo dos resíduos. Desde resíduos, onde nós trabalhamos com os resíduos praticamente onde desenvolvemos as pesquisas, mas também aqueles resíduos que estão dentro do nosso laboratório. Então, nós teremos uma abordagem bastante ampla, com um debate, desde a área de produção de biocombustíveis até questões que envolvem saúde única. Na sequência, então, no período da tarde, em todos os dias, nós teremos uma palestra técnica. Essa palestra, então, será direcionada por um convidado que abordará um tema específico em cada um dos dias. E, na sequência, às 2h15 do horário do Brasil, nós teremos, então, uma sessão de debate com os autores dos 12 trabalhos que foram selecionados, ou seja, os 12 trabalhos mais votados, mais bem avaliados durante o processo de avaliação dos abstracts e dos vídeos que nos foram enviados. Aqui eu gostaria de deixar um agradecimento especial a todos que se propuseram a enviar seu trabalho, se propuseram a estruturar ideias para poder compartilhar. É muito importante esse ambiente e essa é a proposta do Sigera, para que possamos trocar experiências e nos relacionar com relação às novidades, às estruturas de pesquisa que estamos desenvolvendo. Destes trabalhos, nós recebemos aí um volume relativamente grande de trabalhos, o que nos impressionou para essa edição. E o que nos impressionou mais ainda foi a grande engajamento que nós tivemos no envio das informações a partir dos autores dos trabalhos, e por isso eu gostaria de deixar um agradecimento especial a todos os autores. Ao final do último dia, nós teremos, então, a premiação dos trabalhos. Nós temos esse ano, como acontece em todas as edições, nós teremos os premiados na área de agricultura, na área de pecuária e na área de agroindústria, onde os vencedores receberão como prêmio a possibilidade de se inscrever em um dos cursos à distância disponibilizados pela Shimatsu do Brasil, e também os autores dos trabalhos poderão usufruir de desconto da anuidade na associação da Sbera. Além disso, nós teremos algumas outras novidades. Então, teremos alguns sorteios aos participantes, então eu gostaria apenas de, não vou revelar agora, mas gostaria de deixar que todos fiquem conectados, acompanhando a programação, que ao longo da programação nós teremos novidades. Na sequência, então, de cada um dos dias, nós teremos, ao final, às 3 horas, nós teremos um curso, esse curso voltado para tratamento, disposição, reuso e aproveitamento do digestato, né, que é um dos resíduos utilizados, que se tem desenvolvido muitos trabalhos, com um grupo de especialistas bastante gabaritados com relação a isso, inclusive colegas, né? Então, ficam todos à vontade. Quem ainda não se inscreveu nesse curso, o curso não tem custo adicional, porém tem que estar inscrito dentro da plataforma, tá? E é possível efetuar essa inscrição, esse registro, dentro do link de programação. Esse curso ele vai ser dividido em 2 momentos. O primeiro momento, então, é uma aula de aproximadamente 40, 50 minutos, 1 hora, e, na sequência, nós temos, então, um momento de conversa e interação com os professores do curso. Então, esse momento acontecendo após as 3 horas da tarde. Para explicar um pouquinho como funciona a plataforma, no qual vocês estão aqui conectados, e tentar ajudar um pouquinho com relação à nesse primeiro momento, eu gostaria, então, de mostrar como que funcionam algumas questões básicas da plataforma. Nesse momento, nós estamos já no ambiente de transmissão online, então, vocês que já estão me enxergando aqui, me vendo aqui, nós estamos no ambiente de transmissão online. Para acessar os trabalhos que foram enviados, os vídeos dos trabalhos que foram enviados e também o resumo, o abstract de cada trabalho, é possível efetuar, através da aba Apresentação de Trabalhos, todas as apresentações, onde é possível identificar por cada área temática do simpósio onde está o seu trabalho e os demais trabalhos que você tem interesse. Então, fique à vontade para navegar na plataforma e acessar os trabalhos para conhecê-los. Cada trabalho está identificado e é possível selecionar tanto o abstract quanto o vídeo, que é direcionado, então, para a plataforma YouTube, onde é possível assistir a todos os vídeos que foram disponibilizados pelos autores. Todos os vídeos podem ser acessados a qualquer momento durante a programação, ao longo dos 3 dias, e ser vistos quantas vezes quiserem. A programação do evento, o detalhamento da programação do evento, ela está disponível na aba Programação, dividido por cada tema, por cada sessão, cada atividade e por cada dia do evento de hoje até sexta-feira. Nesse ambiente aqui onde estamos efetuando a transmissão, é possível efetuar perguntas ou interagir no chat ao lado. E também na aba Perguntas é possível identificar ou colocar perguntas que, inclusive, podem ser votadas. As perguntas mais votadas ou as perguntas selecionadas serão encaminhadas, então, para a moderação do painel ou para a moderação da palestra, para um momento de interação, um momento de perguntas e respostas e debate. Da mesma forma, na aba Programação, dentro do ambiente de transmissão, é possível selecionar todas as atividades que vão ocorrer durante o evento e saber qual atividade está ocorrendo naquele momento, para cada um dos dias, dos 3 dias do evento. Então, nesse momento, iniciamos, então, o nosso primeiro painel. Esse painel ele vai ser todo transmitido em inglês. Fiquem à vontade para efetuar as perguntas tanto em inglês, espanhol ou português. A nossa equipe fará um processo de versão para o inglês, para auxiliar aqui o moderador e os palestrantes. Nesse momento, então, this moment, I'd like to present Dr. Francisco Salazar Sperberg, de Línea de Chile. Francisco es nuestro moderador acá. And Francisco is agronomist from la Universidad La Frontera University in Chile, a PhD of regarding University United Kingdom, national leader of environment impact of agricultural production systems group of the sustainable agricultural system area in the Institute of Agriculture and Livestock Research, GEMWE Research Center, located in Osorno, southern Chile. He is also Associate Professor of the Master Science Program in Production, Management, and Conservation of Natural Resources at the Los Lagos University in Chile. He has been director and deputy director of INIA, GEMWE Research Center, has been part of directory of different consortiums of science and technology in Chile. He is currently a board member of Dairy Consortium that brings together various actors in the milk chain in Chile. His research has focused mainly in organic waste management, nutrient loss, and interaction of soil and atmosphere in cattle production system. Dr. Salazar has led and collaborate in research and development, national and international projects, which have provided him global perspective in soil science, organic waste management, and environmental research. Currently, is also a member of Agriculture Task Group in Chilean Greenhouse Gases Inventory. He has published more than 40 peer-reviewed journal papers and over 200 work proceedings. Dr. Salazar is also Associate Editor of Waste Management in Agrisystem from Frontiers Journal. Dr. Salazar, thank you, and your turn.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo, and thank you for the presentation. And I'm very happy to coordinate this panel today. And I'm welcome to everybody, especially thanks to organizing committee to organize this Sigera that in difficult times is complicated, but now we can do it, and we are very happy to have this session today. Today we will be talking about climate change in this panel. We will have two very good speakers, and Then we'll have 40-minute presentation, and as Ricardo said, you can write down your questions on the chats, and then we, at the end of both presentation, we can start asking the question and to the different speakers. So the first presentation will be given by Dr. Barbara Ammon. Barbara is a senior research scientist and research program coordinator at Radis Institute for Agricultural Engineering and Bioeconomy, Department of Technology Assessment and Substance Cycles. She's an associate professor for environmental engineering and agricultural engineering in the University of Zielona-Góra, Poland. Also, she works with sustainability in agricultural system and technology, including future and circular food system, integration of sustainable agricultural production system into concept of One Health, nitrogen and greenhouse gases management and fluxes, and emission inventories in a circular economy approach, including climate change, adaptation, and mitigation of livestock production system interactions, precision farming, and digitalization for bioeconomy, biogas production from organic residues, animal manures, and energy crops in sustainable crop rotations. So we will be very pleased to receive today Dr. Barbara. I'm very happy that she can give us a talk, and the platform is yours, Barbara.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francisco. I will share my screen. Just a second. So you should now be able to see the first slide of my presentation. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. I will be happy to speak about good practice guidance and uncertainty management in greenhouse gas inventories. I will inform you about some general aspects of inventory preparation, and at the end of my presentation, I will give an insight into a joint EU project called MELS on inventories that we are currently doing. So inventories or national inventories have to be prepared under two frameworks, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. The United Framework Convention on Climate Change covers the direct greenhouse gases and also some indirect greenhouse gases like NOx, NMVOC, CO, and SO2 emissions. The Kyoto Protocol was adopted in 1997 and sets internationally binding emission reduction targets. So those are binding for global countries. The Paris Agreement builds upon this UNFCCC and has the aim to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effect. It was adopted at COP21 in Paris in December 2015, and we are now having COP26 in Glasgow, working also on the further refinement and especially on the measures on how to achieve this aim. The aim is to have a global temperature rise below 1.5 or 2 degrees. And all parties, that mean all countries that participate in this Paris Agreement, put forward nationally determined contributions and report regularly on their emissions and on their implementation efforts. And so the question is, how does this reporting work, and how can parties show if they progress towards achieving the climate goals? In UNECE countries, so that is not global, that is mainly European and some Northern American and also Eastern countries, we have to report air pollutant emissions in the Air Pollutant Emission Inventory Guidebook. That is mainly reporting of ammonia and NOx emissions. And this emission inventory guidebook was developed by the UNECE Task Force on Emission Inventories and Projections. It was updated in 2016 and improved by the European Monitoring and Evaluation Program. So that is an initiative at UNECE level. On global level, all countries have to report greenhouse gas emissions. And to do this, they use the IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories. And with respect to agriculture, volume 4 of these guidelines, agriculture, forestry, and other land use, is relevant. And in 2019, a refinement to these 2006 guidelines was published. And I was happy to be a lead author in this refinement and to be able to contribute to update the 2006 IPCC guidelines. In Europe, we have a clear air program. So we are aware that we have to tackle climate change, but we also have to take care about air pollution and reduce air pollution. And here we have a legislative instrument to achieve the objectives that we set for 2030, and that is the National Emission Ceilings Directive. And this National Emission Ceilings Directive combines reduction commitments for 2020 and 2030 for air pollutants in European countries. On this picture, you can see the air pollutants, and for agriculture, mainly ammonia is the relevant air pollution that results from agricultural activities. And we see that European countries need to reduce ammonia emissions by 19% by 2030. This is important to know because when we are talking about climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigation measures in agriculture, we must take care that the measures we suggest for reducing greenhouse gas emissions are also able to reduce ammonia emissions from agricultural activities in order to meet the EU National Emission Ceilings Directive. How do the trends look like? Well, unfortunately, there was some progress in the reduction of ammonia emissions, but not sufficient. So in 2010, we were shortly below the emission target, but later it will not be possible to meet the emission target without additional measures. The main reason for the decline that we see in the 1990s is a reduction in livestock numbers and a reduction in the use of nitrogen fertilizers. It is not an improvement in manure management itself. So we need to get better with respect to ammonia emissions from livestock and manure. In Germany, we have a national ceiling of 550 kilotons ammonia and a reduction obligation of 29% by 2030. And we see that we are far above this limit. And what we also see is that the share of agriculture in the nitrogen emissions is increasing. Green is the share of agriculture, dark blue traffic, light blue industry, dark green wastewater. And we see while in 1995, only 45% of nitrogen emissions resulted from agricultural activity, this share increased to 67% in the period 2010 to 2015. So the relative share of agriculture in total nitrogen emissions has increased, and this, of course, also increases the pressure on agriculture to reduce emissions. Same picture for greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases from agriculture is the orange line, and we see that the trend will increase rather than decrease. Here you see greenhouse gas emission trends for Germany from 1990 to 2019. We see that the share of agriculture is 7.65%. Germany wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% in 2030 and wants to have net zero emissions by 2050. This reduction requirements led to the setup of several climate laws in many European states. So there are some states marked in green that already have climate laws in place. The countries marked in blue are currently preparing such climate laws, and the countries in black do not yet have climate laws to regulate greenhouse gas emission reductions. In Germany, we have the 2030 climate package that consists of the climate action law. This law shows the targets that the sectors shall achieve, and the climate action program that gives indications on how to achieve these reduction targets. The German climate law contains mandatory binding annual emission budgets, also for agriculture. And this is the first time that we see specific, definite reduction requirements for agriculture. Up to now, we had a national obligation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but that was not further broken down to the sectors. But now with this German climate law, each sector has its own emission budget. And we see that by 2030, agriculture will have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Germany by 17%. And that is a rather challenging target. So we see that there is an urgent need for emission reductions, but we also see that emission reductions and mitigation measures must show up in the national emission inventories. So it is very essential to set up emission inventories in a way that they can show if countries achieve or reach their emission targets or not. How can this be done? Emission inventories are prepared from emission factors and activity data. Emission factors, here we need science. We must know, for example, how much greenhouse gases are lost per cow, per pig, with respect to certain manure management technologies or housing technologies. That is the one side of the equation. But we also need to have very good activity data. Activity data are data like number of cows, distribution of housing systems, milk yield, animal performance data, and so on. And here, the best way to come to accurate activity data is to use national activities that are assessed, for example, in national surveys. So inventories need activity data, detailed data on a wide range of activities, feed intake, animal diet, performance, manure production, and so on. When we have this data, we can set up the inventory with a different level of complexity. The IPCC differentiates Tier 1, 2, and 3 methodologies. The Tier 1 is the simplest methodology. It simply uses default emission factors and multiplies them by the number of livestock. The advantage is that it is very easy to set up and that you need not many data to set up this inventory. The disadvantage is that the Tier 1 methodology is less accurate and it cannot show any mitigation measures apart from the reduction of livestock numbers. The Tier 2 approach then is a little bit more complex. Here we use already country-specific activity data, such as, for example, not only the number of cows, but also the milk yield, the amount of nitrogen excretion, the animal diet, the manure management system that is prevalent in the country. The Tier 2 approach is more accurate than the Tier 1 approach. And the most complex approach is the so-called Tier 3 approach. Here we use detailed models and factors. Those models are country-specific models and are developed by the respective countries. Now we ask the question, how do the inventory reporting guidelines influence emission reporting? We did an exercise that we published in a peer-reviewed paper where we compared the IPCC 1996 and 2006 guidelines to see the effect of the reporting methodology on the emissions. We took Austria as a case study and estimated the emissions from the livestock sector to reveal change in the relative importance of emission sources, to investigate the implications of methodological changes on improvement of future guidelines and also on the implementation of mitigation measures, and to shed light on potential implications for the new IPCC 2019 refinement. As I said, we did this study in Austria with livestock, enteric fermentation, manure management, and grazing. And we can see here on the left side, the Austrian inventory estimated with the old 1996 guidelines, and on the right side, the 2006 guidelines. And we see, for example, if we go here to the dark blue share, that is methane emissions from enteric fermentation, their relative share in the total emissions increased by applying the new methodology. And at the same time, here in light blue, indirect N2O emissions from soil, this share increased. And this change between left side and right side was only due to a change in the reporting methodology. Everything else in this exercise was kept constant. We also see that between 1996 and 2006, the relative importance of blue enteric fermentation increases. The relative importance of green manure management N2O emissions decreases. Manure management methane emissions stays nearly constant, and agricultural soils N2O emissions decreases. And if we look on the right side, we have here the contribution of methane in blue and N2O emissions in red, and we see that with the new IPCC guidelines, the relative importance of methane emissions in total emissions in the inventory increases. What are our conclusions? The further 2019 refinement includes important updates for future national inventory reports. And the challenge of future inventory improvement will include the gathering of high-resolution data and accurate country-specific emission factors. But such improvements are worth the efforts for policymakers and for farmers. High-quality analysis reveals the potential emissions savings and efficiency gains that are easiest to access. The inventory methodology has a significant effect on emission estimates and consequently on the effects of mitigation measures in the inventory. Since the relative magnitude of methane emissions increased, it is likely that mitigation measures for methane emissions will have a greater impact on emission reductions in the inventory. Mitigation measures from manure management could have a greater impact on the emission inventories with the IPCC 2006 guidelines. And the reduced N2O emission factor for solid manure storage in the IPCC 2006 guidelines significantly decreased N2O emission estimates. The summary on the part of emission inventories. We have international obligations, and these set limits for agricultural ammonia and greenhouse gas emissions. Inventories must be reliable, transparent, consistent, comparable, complete, and accurate. High-quality inventory reporting is essential to reflect the current situation and to show the effect of mitigation measures. Countries are encouraged to use country-specific, sophisticated emission inventory methods and models. This requires detailed activity data, high-quality emission factors, and the use of models that combine both. High-quality inventories are an essential instrument for implementing emission mitigation measures. So now that we know this, the question is, how do we bring this to life? How do we bring this to practice? And this is where our ARANET project MELS comes in. MELS stands for Mitigation Emissions from Livestock Systems. We know that a range of mitigation measures exist. And at the same time, we see that those mitigation measures are not fully implemented into commercial practice. We see the so-called science policy gap, where we fail to impact scientific results into commercial practice on farms. When we work on mitigation measures, we must consider the whole livestock system, starting with the production of crop, the housing, the manure storage, and the fertilization with manure. In MELS, we create a global database. This builds on a database that has been set up by the Global Research Alliance, and we add more data on emissions and omission factors to this database. And then we do statistical analysis to find functional relationships between emission factors and activity data to be able to predict emissions more accurately. All this is done in an intensive stakeholder interaction to have the view and the requirements of commercial farms in the project from the very beginning. The output of the project will be, on the one hand, a farm-scale greenhouse gas decision support system that helps the farmer to find the optimum measure to reduce greenhouse gases on his farm, and improved national inventories. So we will also develop suggestions how we can improve national emission inventories. The MELS consortium is a very wide consortium with several partners in Europe. We have Francisco from Chile as full partner. We also have AgResearch from New Zealand as full partner. We have Embrapa Brazil in our advisory board, and we also have the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences in our advisory board. What do we do in MELS? First of all, we collate data on manure management. We have the database that contains mitigation options from greenhouse gas and ammonia emission publications, relationships between key variables and emission factors, and finally, inventory improvements. We built this database on, as I said already, on the database and widened the geographical coverage by adding data from Eastern and Southern Europe, Latin America, and China. We have many observations in our database on methane, N2O, and ammonia emissions from manure storage and from animal housing. And we have several emission factors also in the database with which we can estimate functional relationships. This database is then entered into Work Package 3, the component modeling. Here we develop functional relationships between greenhouse gas and ammonia emissions from farm components in the manure management chain. And we develop mechanisms to incorporate mitigation measures into the functional relationships. To do this, we had an online mini workshop led by AgResearch in New Zealand to estimate emission factors, modeling emission factors, investigate difference between groups, for example, animal types, geographic range, housing type, floor type. And we want to develop a written guideline on how we can analyze emission data for future work. Here you can see first results of this component modeling. Experts in statistics from ATB AgResearch and the University in Athens are analyzing data in working groups on cattle housing, pig housing, poultry housing, and cattle and pig manure stores. And here you see a first descriptive analysis of the data. Here we have methane emission factors selected by measurement duration. And here we have N2O emission factors. And this data analysis is currently ongoing. In Work Package 4, we want to develop a farm-scale greenhouse gas emission support system. We reviewed 15 existing tools, and we see that the decision support approaches that are currently used are scenario analysis, contribution analysis, or progress monitoring. And we found two categories of tools, either emission calculators or multi-pillar sustainable assessment tools. And from this review, we concluded that we will use the GLEAM FAO model as a base system to incorporate MELS results and to develop an improved prototype of a farm-scale decision support system within the MELS project. Work Package 5 works on improving national inventories and projections. As I already said, we want to improve the accuracy and reportability of emissions. We want to quantify the costs and benefits of emission mitigation measures. We want to find a way to reduce the costs of collecting activity data, because you may understand that if we carry out a representative survey on many agricultural farms, that is a very laborious task, and we want to find out which are the key variables that influence in the emissions, and only survey these key variables to reduce costs of collecting activity data. And we want to also to investigate how transparency in the inventory can be retained in more complex inventories in order to enable their external review and prove efficacy of mitigation measures. So we started to review mainly partner inventories about the method that they apply. So we have tier 2 methods, country-specific methods, tier 1 methods. That is the first step, that we review existing inventories. And from that, we will then develop a template on national activities to collect activity data. And we will contact the inventory compilers, and for example, we will ask them what they consider the greatest barriers to maintain and improve accuracy and detail in their inventories. We will start with the MELS partner countries to contact the inventory compilers, and then see what they say and collect data and write a report from this. We will have bilateral meetings with the inventory compilers, and then a workshop to conclude on this task. And last but not least, we also, of course, have a consultation and dissemination work package in MELS, where we have on the one end transnational consultation to ensure that views of main stakeholders are taken into account. We have national dissemination to disseminate the project outcomes to stakeholders in each partner country. And we have a wider international dissemination to IPCC, Task Force on Reactive Nitrogen, COPA-COGEZA, and so on. So what is the outlook in the next step? We will further carry out the in-depth analysis of the functional relationships and identify key influencing factors. From that, we identify the most suitable mitigation measures and their effect and cost. We develop a more refined decision support system for policymakers and farmers. And we identify how the collection of activity data for emission inventorying can be improved, making the inventories more detailed and the data collection less cost-intensive. And on the bottom of this page, you see a picture of one of our typical meetings. As you can well imagine, also we have to meet online most of the time. You can see me sitting on the car in the middle. I was not the driver during that time, but I participated while sitting on the car. And besides me, you can see Francisco, who very often has the drawback that due to the time difference, he has to start at 5 a.m. in the morning participating in his meeting. And we are always very thankful for his enthusiasm to start that early to participate in our meeting, because we cover Latin America, Europe, and China, and you can very well imagine that it is not very easy to find a time frame where the whole project consortium is awake. So this concludes my talk, and I will be very happy to discuss and answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara, for your very comprehensive presentation. We have people from different countries that are today in the meeting, so they can write down the question on the chat, and then we are going to ask you at the end of the Alessandro presentation. Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we will go to the next presentation. It will be carried out for Dr. Alessandro Sanches Pereira. He is executive director of the Instituto 17 or Institute 17. He's a senior sustainable researcher with 20 years of professional experience in the public and private sectors on topics related to sustainable development, environmental planning, bioenergy development, waste to energy recovery, circular economy, having worked in international cooperation projects, uh, different projects aiming to developing countries and in independent consultant to the UN agency since 2010. He also holds a postdoctorate in energy planning from USP in 2014. His PhD in environmental engineering from Unicam, Master in Management and Policy from Lund University in Sweden, and Sanitary Technology graduate from Unicam. He is also Associate Professor of Sustainable Policy at Curtin University, Australia, a member of the IPCC Working Group 3, as a lead author of Chapter 5 of the Sixth Assessment Report ER6. So, Alessandro, we are very happy to have you here and to share with you your work. I'm very interested to know your work. So please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you so much, Francisco, and thank you everyone for inviting me to participate in this important event, especially nowadays that we are talking climate change in a more urgency than before, and in the middle of the COP 26, which make this topic here more relevant than ever. First of all, I would like to thank you, Barbara, for the presentation. I think she made my life easier in many ways because I'm more from the policy and management side than the technical side, and she solved a lot of questions that I might be facing on my way when I try to talk about more technical points of my presentation. So thank you so much, and it was a quite interesting and clear presentation. I'll try to share my screen now, so then we can. Is everyone seeing my presentation?
No, not yet, Alessandro.
What about now?
It's coming. Now it's okay. Go
Perfect.
ahead. Yeah.
So what we are going to be talking is about mitigation opportunities for fossil fuel dependence, and try to look at how agribusiness can be part of these opportunities. And the keystone for that to happen, it's looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the 17, that it guides us and give a framework for how to accomplish that. So just for you to understand from where I'm coming from, or actually not myself itself, but especially the data that we're going to be presenting here in the discussion. So all the data that we're going to be presenting here is part of the Brazil Energy Program, that is a partnership between the government of UK and Brazil government that are looking at the energy transition in a broader way. So the project is a big project, it's a 2-year project covering 5 pillars. That is waste management or waste to energy specifically, biofuels, natural gas slash hydrogen economy, solar, and offshore wind power. So it's a broad program covering all transition areas of the energy makeup of the country. It's a partnership, it's a consortium led by Adam Smith International, from which Instituto 17, which is an NGO here from Brazil, is part with FGV, Carbon Limit Technologies, and hubs. So that's just to give the overview from where the data are coming. So as I said in the beginning, when we talk about visions for the future, and I think Barbara made that very clear, how it's important to have science and technology behind of the information to guide us for mitigation options, and how important it is to have capacity development and providing tools for people to use that knowledge in a practical way. And that cannot be detached from finance and financial inclusion, especially when it comes to small farmers. And the only way to build all of that is to look at a multi-stakeholder partnerships. Especially for building data, we need to have collaboration among not only experts, but also companies and local communities, especially small farmers. The other thing that I think is quite important when we look to SDG 17 is that when we are looking about sustainable development strategies, it's not enough just to have a national perspective or strategy. It's very important, especially when we are looking at agriculture and bioenergy in a way, that we need to have subnational strategies as well, because territory, it's always very linked with the feasibility of an energy project or a mitigation project when it comes to agriculture. So we cannot look the problem without seeing where it's happening. So subnationals also is quite important. So this is a broad view about what the SDGs has to do when we're talking about mitigation opportunities. So different from Barbara, we start our research in a different end of the spectrum of how to deal with agribusiness or agriculture. We are looking about the energy potential that could be coming from residues from those sectors. And as Barbara was looking at emissions inventory, pollutions, we are looking about how much energy could be a surplus for that sector in a way. For doing that, we also start looking at a new perspective, because there are a lot of energy potentials from, especially looking at biogas related to residues management in agriculture. And we try to be a little bit more practical and start to look at a short-term solution for that. So when we start looking at the potential, we frame it in a way that we need to be something that could be built or financed or be in operation between 3 years or 4 years from now or 5 years from now. So we had to have a cut in our methodology to looking at establishments that already have waste management happening, but they're not providing energy from it. So we look at three subsections, the sectors that is livestock, industry, sanitation, and biogas production. And we try to look at that also about how we can link the volume of biogas with practical financing and capacity building development. So we look as this volume of biogas based on potential biogas plants. So because this, we can look at the territory and see where I should start making my moves or directioning my policy to foster biogas development. So when we look at that, we add it up. So we try to see what was this short-term potential. And what was interesting is that we saw that in between 5 years, we could develop 13% of the long-term potential. So we could have 10 billion metric cubic a year of biogas, which could be make a very big difference. Right now, biogas is represents less than 1% of the energy matrix of Brazil. So that could be a huge improvement of renewables in our energy matrix, especially in the phase that we are facing now with the drought that is reducing our reservoirs and increasing our dependency on fossil fuel, especially thermal plants. And when we look at from where this short-term potential could come, we see that sanitation is still the biggest one because it's already concentrated and is already happening there. and we saw a small portion in livestock or agriculture. But this doesn't mean that it's not important, especially because we can solve other problems, especially local development, and push agriculture in the Brazilian agriculture to neutrality as soon as possible. So with this short-term potential, we try to look at how that could play out in the energy matrix and the energy planning of the country. So this short-term potential can increase the number of biogas plants in the country. That is around, I think, is 800 now. That we can increase for 30,000 plants by the next 5 years, and this could represent around 4.7 percent of our national electricity consumption, which is quite significant. And also, we can replace 61% of the diesel imports if we look at as fuels for transport and agriculture machinery. That's going to be something quite interesting, and something that we should look at, that is the potential that is already there, is a low-hanging fruit, so it's easier to realize than other biogas potentials in the country, because this already has a management that is gathering this resource for producing energy. Something that is quite important for us, especially for Brazilians that has been facing the fossil fuel crisis right now, with the high rise of fuel price. The diesel, it's becoming quite expensive. That can jeopardize our logistics in the country because everything is moved by roads, and we already had the movement from the truck drivers when they had the strike, and that caused a lot of damage for our economy, and they are still threatening us with more strike given the price. So biogas, when converted to biomethane, are able to cover 61% of all oil imports. And if we look at the overall consumption of diesel of the country, biomethane in the short term could represent 58%. So when it comes to energy security, that's quite important. And I don't bring here all the other benefits about air quality that will improve and emission reductions. That's something that we'll be looking at. So the question also is, but once I have this short-term potential, where is it? Where is it located? And where I can cause more impact. So as I said, like if we look at volume of biogas, we can see that Southeast, especially São Paulo state, has a higher potential because, and also basic industry, because that comes from sugarcane, from sugar mills that already have vinasse, so it's already allocated large volumes that can be converted to large volumes of biogas. That's a direct impact in when it comes to volume. However, if I look at the number of plants, it's really small when compared to livestock, for example, or sanitation, which makes that volumes are important, but the number of plants also can play out a lot in developing the country and creating other benefits beyond emission reductions and increase of renewables. We need to look at employment. We need to look at local development. We need to look at other components of local development in a sustainable way. So we always need to keep in mind that number of plants is also important when it comes to development. So if we start looking at the more a sectorial view, and then we go to agriculture, we see that agriculture in Brazil, it's responsible for 28% of our inventory of the emissions that we produce, being the bad villain, land use change and forestry. That's come mostly of deforestation and other expansion of natural forests with being removed and cut down the trees. But agriculture is still a very significant impact. And when we look at that in more details, we see that animal manure management, which is based our short-term potential, correspond to around 4% of that emission. So what we are saying is there is a high probability or a high likelihood that we could reduce a lot of CO2 emissions by looking and improving animal manure management. And something that Barbara pointed out as well, especially when she saw the decrease of the importance of manure of manure management, she said that the improvement happens on the reduction of scale, not in improvement of management. So that's quite important for us to look at in Brazil, that we need to improve our manure management, and that can open up opportunity for energy production. So we are going to be looking at our first short-term potential, that would be livestock. So when you go for livestock, what we have, as I said, is a huge number of potential for plants. So we talk about more than 26,000 biogas plants that could be built in a very short time, and in a significant volume of 1 billion cubic meters of biogas a year. And what we did here is, okay, we can see that the potential of energy. So what will be the impact of reducing the carbon footprint of the agricultural sector, looking at this sector, specifically in manure management? So we conduct a life cycle analysis, and we look at fattening pigs and other milk cattle and poultry, and we conduct especially an LC life cycle analysis for fattening pigs farms, and we saw a huge benefit in not just the number of plants, but the number of emissions that could be reduced for that. Here are key some figures when it comes to the size of the potential and where it's located in the country. So we can see Santa Catarina state that has a tradition in swine culture, that it has a biggest number of plants and volume, and also Minas Gerais, that's also playing out. But the South and Minas Gerais are the ones that standing out mostly. When you go to cattle, we start to see a changing for that. So we start, and dairy cattle will be mostly in the southeast and also the state of Goiás. But mostly Minas Gerais will be the one that has the highest volume and the number of plants. So this shows us how we can even look at our agriculture policy and try to use that for pushing for more energy production and mitigation of greenhouse gases related to manure management. And when you go for laying hens from poultry, we start to see again that we have, when it comes to volume, we have São Paulo being the front runner, but the potential of plants and local development is spread out, especially in the south of the country. Unfortunately, these are the only case that we didn't conduct an LCA. So all the numbers that I'm going to be showing later on about mitigation will be not considering these plants, because one of the things that we are building in our inventory is looking real data. So we are collecting data in real cases and modeling real biogas plants. And we could not find yet partners for that. And sometimes, but we're still looking at them and trying to improve as much as possible our database. So when you start looking at the decarbonization potential for this sector, so what we have is that we can have more than 23,000 plants of biogas. And if we convert that into electricity, we can decrease around 17% of the emissions of that segment in waste management manure, just looking at these two types of productions, swine production and dairy cattle. If we convert that to biomethane, we can reduce 18% of the emissions from manure management, which is quite impressive in a very short time. So we go now for industry because we are looking at sugar cane is mostly and dairy. So if we see the potential now for biogas, looking at agribusiness industries, we see that São Paulo start having again a very important role in volume, especially because of the sugarcane industry. But when we start looking at a number of plants, we see that dairy industry is the one that has the highest potential for local development and creating jobs, position, and extra energy, and spread out the source of energy production. So when we look at sugar plants, it's, as we said, it's clear that will be São Paulo because 85% of the sugar mills in the country is located in a single state, and that's São Paulo. So, but the amount of plants that can be produced is no more than 171 for São Paulo, and the rest will be spread out in other areas. So we have a total of 400 plants in the universe of many plants that could be built. So when you see the dairy that has the highest potential of plants, we can go for more 1,000 plants. And we see that Minas Gerais is the one standing out for that because it's one of the biggest milk producers. But we see the relevance in the south as well and southeast. Unfortunately, we still not having the LCA results for this one. We're still building. And so all the emissions reductions will be based only in sugarcane. The same happens for the slaughterhouse, that we start to measure where the slaughterhouse distribution is and the amount of biogas could be produced. So it's more evenly spread out in the country. So there is a large impact, but it's still very much centralized in the number of plants that we can rely on for this short-term potential. And again, we don't have yet the LCA results for slaughterhouse. So all the emission reductions that you're going to be looking for this subsector is based on sugarcane. So looking at the sugarcane in the VIS production of biogas, we can reduce around 4.5% of the reduction of the emissions if we convert everything into electricity. And we can increase more, a little bit more, the reductions if you look at diesel equivalents and converting a diesel fleet into gas. Now it's the more interesting results that comes from where the benefits of this are coming from, and what are the life cycle analysis results given impact, and what is the difference. So what we see here is that that are the life cycle analysis that we run for different types of business, and these are real data from real plants, which is helping us to build the local database and key factors for local productions in Brazil that we used before, more international factors than, because we didn't have our own. So we are building the database and moving from tier 1 analysis to tier 2 analysis with more local specific data and emission factors. So what we see here is that overall, biomethane has the biggest impact in emission reductions when compared to electricity generation, which is changed a little bit because it's increasing the benefits of using biogas for electricity generation now that our electricity matrix is changing to more thermal plants and less hydro. So that could be changing in the future, how that's play out. But in the biggest contribution in emission reductions will be to convert biomethane. We had a very interesting case. One of the farms for the cattle manure farm example, they convert their local fleet to gas, so they are producing their own fuel for their local equipment and transport of the animals, which increase their profitable, make their business more profitable and saving a lot of money from fuel and reducing a lot of emissions from their process by replacing diesel by biomethane. So those are quite interesting numbers, and you can see how much of emissions could be avoided on just improving the manure management and starting producing energy from it. This is the overall benefit for all the plants, so that's as estimation. So we could create in a very short time more than 28,000 new positions work. We could replace more than like 8.2% of the total national consumption of chemical fertilizers using the digestate, although we have a lot of considerations to do about the digestate, like the discussions that Embrapa is building. We have at least an estimation of how much money would be invested for making this potential to be realized in the 5 years. And we could reduce the energy sector carbon footprint of the country by 12%, which is a huge contribution for our target as a country. It's quite important for us to talk about how many people have been involved in companies. We could not do this without Embrapa, especially Embrapa Suínos e Aves, that it's our partner to guide us in the analysis, especially in the life cycle analysis. But there are many other companies and associations, institutions helping us to get the real data for us to have a local database for emission factors and improve our inventory as well. It's a large number of people involved in this, as are more than 50 consultants working on this, and we are going to be increasing these to other sectors as well. So thank you so much for the opportunity for being here. In this care code, you can register for getting all the data that we are producing in our project. And we are going to be producing booklets with the methodology, numbers, and also dashboards with information about potential decarbonization and emission by substract and sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alessandro, for your presentation, and very good to see the data of the Brazilian work on energy, especially on biogas. So we will have some questions on the chat, and I will pass to you later, okay, during the presentation. Yes, we are going to start the panel for questions and answers. We have different questions on the chat from colleagues especially from Brazil, and there's one three or similar for you, Barbara, related to COP26, especially to see what are the greenhouse gases emission mitigation proposed by government and of COP26, if they are able to reach them, and what are opportunities do we have? And and related to that is you believe that they will meet the goal by the end of the decade. So there is a lot of expectation about COP26. Okay, Barbara.
Yeah. So you would like me to answer these questions? Yeah, I will try my very best, but as you know, I'm not a politician and not part of the COP26.
Yep.
I'm an agricultural expert, and I can talk about a lot about what agriculture can do to reduce emissions. I can also talk about the relevance of the IPCC guidelines and also of the IPCC assessment reports. We have the first part of the sixth assessment report out some weeks ago. Working group 2 and 3 are a little bit delayed due to the COVID crisis, but I think that is the scientific basis that we are working on. And I can only recommend, if you want to have a clear view and the clear information on exactly these questions, that you consult the IPCC website and here mainly the summary for policymakers. Because here you can find key statements summarized in a very short and concise manner. And behind these statements is the result of scientific research, global scientific research from 196 countries, and also global agreement by the parties of 196 countries. And I think that is the best information source that you can get when you ask questions, are we doing enough and can we achieve the goals? And as far as I see, the working group 1 statements here are very clear that their climate change is at the moment affecting every part of the globe. There's no parts that are not affected by climate change, but we still are in a range where we can achieve the 1.5 goal, but we have to act immediately. I think that this was very clear from the Working Group 1 report, and it was also conveyed in the media.
If I can complement a little bit
Yes,
with Barbara is saying, is just today we finished our chapter and we submit. Group 3 is finishing today, so all the chapters.
I have to write the review editor report also today.
So we finish our chapter today. So things are happening on March next year for Group 3 assessment report. So it's something that is coming. But I think it's too early as well. Well, I think Barbara was more diplomatic than I will be here. But it's too soon to say the results of COP26 right now. We see that there is a big movement happening. We see a more willingness to change the current trends. But all the numbers that we are seeing so far, all the pledges are coming without no strategic plan behind each one of them. So we have big pledges happening again, but no strategic planning and how to do it yet. But we just started. We have 2 weeks to go, and things has to come from the bilateral agreements and what's really happening. For example, Brazil has signed the commitment to reduce methane, which is quite important. So we are moving towards very specific pollutants, or which makes a very important way to tackle the problem. When you're talking about just CO2 equivalent, it's such a broad range of pollutants that we can do, and you can dilute forces to tackle a big problem in a very short time. So I think it was quite smart to have this decision. I think we sign up that by the pressure of the United States, but it's a quite important movement looking at countries that has agriculture as a very important part of their business and their development. Look at methane reductions now, which can get a short-term impact on emission reductions. I don't see that Brazil will meet the targets of that without bringing carbon capture and storage in the process as well. So it's something that we need science and technology now to help us. It's not just about management, but we need to start looking at carbon capture and storage in many fronts. And agriculture is already a big storage. Agricultural land is a big storage. So we need to look at how to increase that storage capacity.
And Alessandro, in the same context, how do you see the contribution of the private sectors on these goals? I mean, how we can, involve them more on these goals that we have as from the research point of view or the public point of view?
Yeah. The chapter that I was involved in the IPCC was looking at adaptation, not adaptation, but mitigation from the demand side. So we are looking how behavior change, how circular economy, how sharing economy could play out as mitigation instruments for reducing our carbon footprint. So voluntary agreements and the private sector becomes a quite important sector, because most of the tendencies that you have in consumption comes from the private sector, allowing you of guiding you through not just advertisement but access to products. So we need to see the balance between markets, and we can see that, for example, when you have non-tariff barriers from countries or big companies having strike from the consumers for having produce that coming from deforestation, that comes from for not from fair trade, that coming from harming animals in any way. So those kind of changing behaviors in the consumption can play out an important pressure or a leverage point in private companies moving out from non-sustainable practice and financing emission reductions. We have good example of companies that it's looking at going 100% renewable for their energy, or looking at fair trade in a way that is not having employment slavery there. So I think that if we start having a real carbon market or emission trading scheme that it's sustainable, like RenovaBio here in Brazil, that we have for biofuels, can have a big impact on the private sector, because they're going to see as an opportunity for making money. Unfortunately, there is this relation about improving financial stability of companies, and that's one way that they need to look at.
Okay. In the same context, Ayrton Kunz from Brazil, Dr. Ayrton Kunz from Brazil, is asking you if what are the opportunities for Brazil, considering Brazilian commitment at COP26 to reduce methane emission by 30%.
I think many of the options has to consider carbon capture storage. I think that's something that we need to look at. I see a lot of that bioenergy, that the BECUS, that bioenergy linked to carbon capture use and storage. That so using part of the material that we are capturing there, like CO2. There is a lot of use of that in the beverage industry, in the chemical industry. Need some components that we can capture from the production of bioenergy. So that's one point. But I think for that we really need to think about how we can improve the Plan ABC for Brazil, for example, that's already have a lot of impact in mitigation of emissions, has been a very good development and reduction of the carbon footprint of the agriculture sector in Brazil. But we need to improve that. And one way to do that is creating monitoring systems that can help us to not only measure but also where to act. So that's the project that Barbara is involved with MEL's quite important, because something similar happening in Brazil. So I'm shouting to Embrapa now, start to have this partnership increasing with Barbara, because I think will be quite beneficial for have this knowledge transfer. We can increase the opportunities for us to reduce emissions.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yep. So Barbara, in the same context, what are the requirements for MELs, if you can comment on that, for the data or study to be included on the database?
Could you repeat that question?
Yes.
I didn't quite get it fully.
Sorry, which are the requirements for MEL projects of the different studies to be included with the data? I mean, if you need for laboratory experiment, field experiment, or what are the conditions? I mean, that you need to include the data.
Yeah, we include both. We include field experiments and also lab experiments. We have prepared a document that describes very well how the data have to be gathered to be included in the DataMan database. I think one of the most relevant criteria is the publication in a peer-reviewed journal, so that we know that the data have undergone an external review. We have set certain limits of the amount of storage in the lab, for example, the amount of manure storage that has to be included in the experiment, and also on the measurement duration. So a measurement duration of at least 1 week would have to be required for the data to be entered to the database. And this database, we are currently working on it, but it will go online and everyone will be able to access it and also be able to inform us if they would like to have more studies included in the database. And then we would do a quality control check and would be able to add data to this database.
Good. Yeah. We have another question for you, for Dr. Ayrton Kunz from Brazil. He asked, which are the good practices recommended by United European Union to apply manure waste, aiming to avoid ammonia emissions? Or maybe which one are the one that you are identifying with MEL's project?
Yeah. If you want to avoid ammonia emissions after manure application, it is good that the manure has a low dry matter content, that it is a liquid manure, and that if possible you incorporate it immediately into the soil, that you use an application technology that applies the manure directly to the soil and not spreads it first, but has a band application, that you do not apply it during very hot and windy weather, and that you apply the manure according to the crop demand of nutrients. And I think that is very well also in line with what Alessandro showed about the biogas opportunities. That is a typical win-win situation, because when you do biogas from the animal manures, you achieve a considerable reduction in methane emissions, especially if you do it in warm countries like Brazil, where you have very high methane losses from manure stores. And during the anaerobic digestion process, you increase the amount of plant available nitrogen and you decrease the dry matter content of the manure. And then you can spread it much more easily and evenly with low emissions. So biogas is a win-win situation for environmentally friendly manure management. And by the way, Alessandro said that he is also working on biogas fueled machinery. We are currently at the ADB doing an EU project that is called Rest for Life, where we do exactly that. We have an electricity-driven tractor and a biogas-driven tractor. So I think that is also an opportunity to intensify our collaboration here in this field.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And could you also comment on related to Mel's project, if you are, having a look on the integrated measurements for reductions, because sometimes you can have swapping effect. I mean, you can have a very good measure to reduce ammonia, but you exacerbate greenhouse gases. So how are you thinking on that?
Yeah. There's quite a lot of knowledge on manure management and environmentally friendly manure management. For example, we have just very recently published a UNECE document on sustainable nitrogen management. And here we included, I think, about 40 or 50 different measures, and we assessed each of the measures with respect to methane, ammonia, and nitrous oxide emissions, and clearly identified those measures that reduce all three gases. So one of the measures would be biogas production. Another measure would also be slurry acidification, that is beneficial to reduce all gases. But Francisco, I think you said something very important here, that we need to consider also the whole manure management chain. So, for example, if we have low emissions in the animal house, in the barn, and then we use the manure and spread it evenly during a warm summer day, we may lose all the benefits that we gained in the house. So we must take care that we have an environmentally manure management from the beginning until the end. So really consider the whole manure management chain and not only small parts of it.
Thank you. And yes, Alessandro, we have a question here from Felipe Soldano from Brazil. We described that there are up to 102 million reals investment for energy generation from biogas. So does this amount include small livestock producers seeking energy sustainability, or just big ones seeking to inject energy into the grid and generate profit?
Let me be clear that number that we present there for financing is an estimative about how much money would be necessary to create that number of plants. So it's just estimation. It's not something that's already available in funds. On the bright side, there is a lot of funding lines in Brazil for energy projects. Which can be accessed. The Plan ABC just launched the Plan ABC Plus, and I think they already have 20 million maximum for energy projects for production of biogas. But that will depend on the scale. What we are doing in our project is to design business models in different scales and size to help that decision. And we are helping the Brazilian government to look beyond economic feasibility, but also use a multi-criteria analysis to look business model that has to include the potential impact in reducing environmental impact by having that project. So not just money, how much energy I can sell and produce, but also how much I can decrease emission, how many job positions I can create, so how much local development I can create, and looking at as well the scale of the project. It can be replicable to other areas of the country. So if I'm going to be using public money, I should have that into consideration as well. I don't want to have a lock-in project that I cannot use the idea to spread out in other areas of the country. So that's what we are doing. But the Plano Safra has money for energy production from manure. The NDS has lines, and local government, state banks has a lot of financial lines for those, and private banks as well. Most of those funds are related to renewable energy, so can be a little bit tricky to access, but there is a lot of funding lines happening. What is missing is a capacity building of the financial institutions to analyze a biogas project. So it's something that our projects, Biogas, CI Biogas, and other institutions that is looking for the development of biogas, like the GAF project from Unido, that are looking capacity building of financial institutions to analyze biogas projects, because they know really well how to do a solar panel in a house or in a farm, because it's easy project to analyze, but they don't know how that plays out in a biogas plant, which will take a little bit time for be built. And so we are trying to reduce this lack of information from the financial sector about the biogas.
Okay. In this context, for the agriculture sector, are you thinking on biodigestion with only one substrate, or co-digestions, or how do you see the future development of biogas in Brazil?
Well, it's something that we are always discussing in the project, and it's something that I already have many discussions with Embrapa as well, that we already know how to produce biogas really well here in Brazil. What we need to start looking at operational improvement, like the production of biogas, the plant. We know what we need to improve our operation. So that comes co-digesting, understanding the amount that the type of substrate that I can improve my biomethane, my biogas production. How much I can increase my methane production, the share in the biogas. We need to have our temperature curves. What are the ideal temperature for my process? So I think we need to start improving our technology. It's more on the operational side, how to improve. So co-digestion is quite important for us. We had an example in one of life cycle analysis that we did. It's a sewage treatment plant that's co-digestion agriculture, not agriculture, but residues from organic residues from market there, a SEASA, which has a huge environmental impact. So it's very a beneficial environmental impact in reducing emissions and producing better quality biogas and better quality biodigestate that can be used as organic fertilizer and reduce our dependency on imported chemicals. So there is a lot of synergy and circular economy there, and co-digestion is the new frontier for us for that.
Okay. Thank you.
And dry digestion as well. We need to start looking at dry digestion as well.
Yeah, of course. And how the private sector is taking all the work? I mean, do they need incentives? Do they need or is all the regulations are in place to produce biogas, or what? How to go forward in another way? I mean, not only for Brazil, maybe from Latin American countries.
That was one big barrier for us when we started looking at the project and see how we can help to develop faster the biogas. Because the question that we had is, if it's so good, why is not happening? Why do not have? So it's happening. It's increasing fast. So, for example, I think we from the number of plants that we had in the last 5 years, I think we had like a 300% increment in number of plants. So things are moving. And one of the barriers that you had was the asymmetry of information, and especially come for regulations. So because we don't have a national policy pushing for biogas or how to introduce biogas in the energy matrix of the country, it's been quite difficult to tackle this barrier. So what we are doing is, since we don't have a federal plan, we are doing this state by state. So one of the things that we are doing right now is harmonizing state level regulations for fostering biogas. So we are going to be participating next week in the Brazilian the conference of the Brazilian Regulatory Agencies Association. So we are talking with regulatory agencies at state level and some of them at municipality level for them to harmonize all the regulations of biogas, and they have the same framework to operate. So this reduce the risk of investments, because I know how to do biogas in Paraná, which is historically a well developed state on biogas regulation, but I want to do that in Ceará, and I don't know the laws there. So now we are harmonizing so that it's making the private sector more secure where to invest and spread out the investments. Just for looking one thing. And we are trying to do the same thing with environmental licensing as well, which is state by state, and sometimes even municipality level that has some requirements for environmental licensing. So we try to at least to have the basic licensing and regulations be the same throughout the country. So it's an ongoing process, but it's moving fast. And financing, access to financing was the biggest, I think it's also a big barrier, because most of these business or plants, most of the capital are coming from their owners. So because the financing system could not see the potential of that. So we are changing and working with governmental agencies to change that.
Okay, good. Thank you. Barbara, thinking on the Dataman project that collect information on manure management, and the MELS project that we have now, what do you think that would be how to focus the research? I mean, what are the needs for research on thinking on emission factor methodology? So where is the lack of information, or maybe integrate research? I mean, to do I think in the past we tried to do some very thinking only on one gas, but maybe we have now to think on 2 or 3 gases, or maybe other nutrients. So how to go ahead on research on that?
Yeah, well, I see, to be honest, 2 major lines that we will have to cover. We are today talking, as in many presentations, on climate change, greenhouse gases. But, I often say that, of course, agriculture has to contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gas emission, and it is a responsibility to contribute to save the climate. But I personally see the role of agriculture much broader. I think agriculture has the responsibility not only to save climate, but to save the planet. Mm-hmm. And what do I mean when I say this? Agriculture is also contributing to a loss of biodiversity, to nitrate emissions. Agriculture needs to produce food and feed, and also renewable energies. So the role of agriculture, I think, is much broader than its role in contributing to climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But so far, we don't have instruments that really allow to assess this multifunctional role of agriculture. We need to get better in a so-called multi-criteria assessment that considers not only greenhouse gases or ammonia or nitrate losses or economy or social factors, but that needs to combine to an overall assessment. And that is definitely very challenging. We're doing this in a project that is called Milky, that is funded in the same line as MELS, and we will continue doing it also with collaboration of Brazil and Argentina. So I think that is one line. And the second line that I see, when you look at the Dataman database, obviously we only have emission factors for, I'd say, traditional mitigation measures, low trajectory spreading, acidification, biogas. But we are at the moment at the cusp of unimagined opportunities when it comes to digitization of agriculture and precision farming. And I think we can do much more in targeted emission reductions if we use precision farming technologies. But as these technologies, especially in the livestock sector, they are very prevalent already in the crop production, but they are not very prevalent in the livestock production at the moment. We have much more to do here. And as these technologies are not yet well developed, obviously we don't have sound emission factors on technologies supported by precision livestock farming and how they can contribute to closing nutrient cycling and to reducing losses. So I think in that field, we need to do much more research to also include new mitigation technologies into our inventories and into our range of methods or methodologies that we can offer.
Okay, thank you.
So the multi-criteria assessment and the precision livestock farming, this is the two columns that I see.
And what is the, I mean, using modeling maybe, or I mean, how
yes, of course. We also need to do modeling, but it is both, Francisco. We need to start really at the process. We need to understand the process level. We still have limited understanding on when do the emissions start and where and why and how can we ventilate the barn and when should we apply the manure. And if we, for example, want to make optimum use of the nitrogen in the manure, when do the crops need it and how do we spread it in course of the year, not only in spring, but several times. So there's much knowledge that we need at the process level. But of course, as we cannot measure everything, we must also increase our capabilities in modeling. I think we need both. We need sound data to feed the models, and we need more sophisticated models.
Good. Yeah, we have some minute left, so I will let you, if you can do a final comment of your presentation, of the discussion, if you can, I mean, highlights what were your main take-home message from you. So starting for Barbara, and then Alessandro, please.
To be honest, I think my latest statements were some kind of take-home
message.
I think so. Let's say agriculture has to save the planet, not only the climate. We have to know more process-based, not only we have to invest more into precision livestock farming. And and we need science and sound data to feed political processes like the COP26. I think that is so essential that they work on sound data and that they plan their policy strategies not out of the blue, but supported by clear science. And the worldwide collaboration will be indispensable here. And I love to see the IPCC work. I love to see that I'm able to contribute here to Sigera. And we are very closely also collaborating with Embrapa. And I think that is so essential that we have a global view on the problems and also on the solutions.
Yep. Okay, thank you. And Alessandro?
Well, I agree with everything Barbara said. Agriculture is the one that can save the planet, and I think is an important key problem solver, at the same time problem creator as well. That she pointed out really well. And something that we need to look at, and Barbara, and I want to stress what Barbara said, we need more data, we need more science, and we are facing a very strange period in time that science is losing credibility. So, don't lose your mind or get frustrated when people start making questions for you or going against science. Use your patience to explain people, try to see from their perspective, and try to break this important barrier for knowledge that we are facing today. So we have anti-vax people, climate deniers. It's not a wasting time trying to break down the information to these people there, because if they are denying something, they are eager to know because they want to know. So I think we are missing the point of not talking with them and explaining better in a way that they can understand. We that come from the science background, we start to talk in our own jargons. We make difficult people to come in and join the conversation. So help others to understand what we are talking, because it's quite important what we are doing. And we need urgency for change the way we are behaving and consuming and growing and developing in many ways. And there is no way to talk mitigation anymore without talking adaptation. So we need to look at how to adapt everything that we are doing right now with a different climate that we are going to be facing really soon.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think we are only a few minutes left, and then I would like to thank you, both of you, for your excellent presentation and a good discussion about the different issues. So maybe Ricardo want to add something on the conversation to finish?
Yes, Francisco, it's beautiful to hear about this panel. I just mark some words from Barbara, that agriculture is not only for climate change, but it's a solution for our planet, no? And from Alessandro, it's not time to deny the climate change, but it's time to collaborate. No, I think it's like a resume that we. It's very interesting because it's very clear that it's necessary to approximate the academia, the researchers, and the government. It's necessary to establish a very secure. A very secure talking and conversation about this. It's very interesting. Well, I like to thank you again to accept this challenge to stay here with us and discuss a little bit, and especially Francisco, Alessandro, and Barbara. You are welcome to stay with us at the Sigera in the platform from Inventory, and for the participants that are listening us could interact directly in the platform or change some message bar, email, and some contacts inside from the platform. Okay.
Okay. So thank you very much to all of you. Have an excellent day and a good week, and see you during the different presentation in Sigera.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Good to see you.
Eu gostaria só de permanecer aqui um pouquinho para relembrar a todos, então, conforme a nossa programação. Nós temos agora, em 1h30, às 13h30, o horário do Brasil, nós teremos uma palestra técnica com a Ana Caroline Martiniano, que é especialista de produtos em cromatografia da Shimatsu, que vai nos falar um pouquinho sobre tendências na parte de técnicas cromatográficas para análises ambientais. E, na sequência, nós teremos, então, a apresentação dos trabalhos. Como eu comentei, os trabalhos já estão disponíveis na plataforma, no link Apresentação de Trabalhos, e podem ser visualizados tanto o abstract quanto o vídeo diretamente dentro da plataforma. Após a palestra, às 2h15, às 14h15, nós teremos, então, a apresentação dos primeiros 4 trabalhos que fazem parte dos top 12, né? Então, nós teremos, nesse momento, será uma sala dentro do Google Meet, também pelo acesso aqui dentro da plataforma, e pedimos, então, para que os autores destes trabalhos estejam presentes durante a apresentação para interagir com os demais participantes e uma rodada de conversa, uma rodada de perguntas e dúvidas sobre esses trabalhos. Mais uma vez, eu agradeço a presença de todos e aguardo, nos encontramos daqui 1h30. Obrigado.